Hey there, and welcome back to a special edition of RedSpark's Crypto Blog for all your Cardano news and analysis. This is going to be a special edition because I'm focusing on the Cardano hot issue of the day, contingent, or of the week or the month even, and that is contingent staking. I just want to really share my thoughts. Anybody that's followed me on Twitter knows I'm very much on the fence. That's not to say I don't have a strong view on either side. I feel like I can very well articulate both sides of the argument quite well. And I've been trying to figure out for myself where I ultimately end up. And so what I'm going to take you through is really an expansion of some of the things I've been tweeting lately, and just want to really explain my thought process a little bit better. And this will be largely unscripted, so I may end up rambling a little bit, so apologies for that. Okay, so I've seen an argument saying, hey, delegators to a stake pool are not the customers of a stake pool. And hence why in the case of something like Know Your Customer, I think that's where that argument is coming from, these delegators are not customers. And therefore, that the implication appears to be, therefore, there's no need for contingent staking. So, obviously, contingent staking is just a technology option to allow stake pools to have some sort of contingent rule before a delegator can stake with them. It may or may not be KYC related. So that's argument number one. So the question is, should you be not allowing this technological feature because of the fact that these delegators aren't customers, and that's to do with KYC. So they're, in my mind, two separate topics there. But let's, for the sake of argument, play along with this thinking. Delegators are not customers. Well, if they're not customers of the SPOs, then is there an issue here? Why not have this feature to allow stake pool operators to do contingent staking? And if the SEC or whoever did try and enforce KYC on stake pools, they can say, hey, these aren't our customers. I don't see an issue there. The not being able to have that feature built in is going with the argument that we want to say to the SEC, well, we'd love to follow your orders, but we can't. That's the way that's going. Versus, if you're truly saying delegators are not your customers, then the argument should be, well, we could implement it, but we're not going to because they're not actual customers. And then if need be, have that argument out in court or whatever. But that would be the right path to follow. It doesn't make sense to limit the technological capability because you are afraid to make that argument to regulators, to have that debate about whether or not a delegator is a customer. So if delegators are not customers, stand by that belief and know that you can, collectively, we want to do this as an industry, argue that delegators are not customers. It shouldn't be impacting or limiting the technological capabilities for options available to stake pool operators. So that's point number one. I'm not interested in helping anyone evade the laws of their own country. So I have seen some arguments out there which seem to be coming from the point of view that, if a country dictated KYC, then stake pool operators of that country would have to now do KYC. Well, yeah, I don't see an issue with that. I'm more concerned with stake pool operators of a different country having to now do KYC or some other, sort of hurdle when they're not required to. But for pool operators of a particular country or pool operators that are dealing with delegators of a particular country, if the law is such that you have to do certain actions, then I don't really have an issue with that. I'm not interested in any argument to do with how do we help people bypass the law. My view is we need to change the law, not bypass the law. Okay, so that's an important distinction I want to make. As I'm not a fan of, let's say, US laws creeping into non-US operators who've got nothing to do with the US. But that's a different argument to what I've seen at times out there saying that, oh, we want to help the US operators somehow evade their own laws. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. That's one of my key starting points. Separation of church from state, and likewise technology for morals. So, the separation of church from state is the sort of mantra that we have in the US and in other sort of Western countries, where people are entitled to having different religious beliefs, but it shouldn't impact the day-to-day affairs of the country. And I'm kind of thinking of it in a similar way when it comes to blockchain. We're all going to have different morals, ethics, philosophies, etc., but it shouldn't really impact the capabilities that we build in to the blockchain. The blockchain should be the blockchain discussion around something like CS should really be on a technological basis that, hey, this is an extra feature that we build in, and it shouldn't be impacted by different philosophies about that, about the use of that feature. That should be a separate discussion. But then that does bring into mind, let's go over to can't do evil, won't do evil. I've given a little preview of what else I'll talk about in a second. But, going back to this separation of church from state and technology from morals, you could then use that argument against me and say, well, okay, well, in that case, let's build in every possible technological feature and let people abuse it. Great. Is that what you're saying? So I thought about that. I thought, well, no, that's not what I'm saying. I don't want to put in features that would allow people to do those sort of man-in-the-middle sandwich attacks that they have on Ethereum, for example, where they can scalp people. So no, I don't want to give people those sort of tools. So I thought, well, what's the difference? Well, what am I saying here? I think I want to have technological features provided it's not going to give people the opportunity to do evil, right? And so let's see. We'll come back to that last point in a second. It'll make more sense after I go through the other 2 points. So the no slippery slope, that's Bitcoin paranoia. Again, this is the idea that we're too scared to make any technological improvements to the base layer, because the more features we have in there, the more it's going to become a slippery slope for regulators and others to come in and clamp down. And again, this goes back to this separation of church from state and technology from morals. We cannot be in a situation where we're so scared of regulators, we just stop all improvement to the base layer. That's not something I want. Now the question is there a slippery slope here? No. And the next bullet along, why US SPOs will still exist. This is why I don't think there is a slippery slope. And also going back to the fact that, look, I'm not interested in helping anyone evade the laws of their own country. So if there was a need, let's assume there was a KYC need for people in the US, okay? Then US SPOs would have to abide by that. I'm not interested. I don't care if they want to bypass that. If they're in the US, they have to follow US laws. So we can make their life easier to do that by having contingent staking. And what would happen is there would be a certain amount of pools that can cater to the US audience, and the US audience would go to them. Because the US audience, by and large, unless they are deliberately trying to bypass the laws of their own country, then sure, they may choose to use a non-contingent staking or non-KYC pool. But for the average US citizen or investor, I imagine they want to keep everything above board. So they will be drawn to using a US SPO that takes care of KYC for them. They may not be happy about it, but they would do it because they don't want to get into any trouble. Okay, but that's not going to then take away business from the rest of the world. Okay, a non-US person who does not have to go through KYC, why on earth would they why would they choose a US SPO to delegate to over a non-contingent staking SPO? I'm based in the UK, and if I can avoid KYC, I definitely will. So unless I'm forced to stake with a KYC stake pool because the laws of my country tell me I have to, unless that happens, I'm not going to. So I actually was thinking about this, and I don't think there is a slippery slope here. There's just the option for US stake pools to cater to their customers better, and the rest of the world can just carry on doing their own thing. So I don't think the slippery, I don't think the slippery slope argument is a real concern. And I just think it leads to a Bitcoiner paranoia that anything we do could be a slippery slope. And again, going back to my prior point, no, I just think we need to separate technology from that paranoia and from those morals and ethics. Just keep the two discussions separate. And so then that gets me to this can't do evil, won't do evil. So I want to build in extra features into the base layer because I don't think it's going to cause any harm. I don't see a slippery slope. And part of the reason why there is no slippery slope is that there is that freedom of choice. If everybody was forced to use a contingent staking stake pool, and if everybody was forced to use them, then I'd be concerned. But in this particular situation where having a contingent staking on your stake pool is optional, and B, for a delegator, whether they then delegate to your stake pool is also optional. Where you've got both those freedom of choice, then I don't see this as a can't do evil, won't do evil debate. And what I mean by that is I've seen some people out there using Charles's own words about can't do evil, won't do evil, which was said when he said that he was talking about dApps. We can now create dApps to cater to different types of rules and regulation, and we can build in the programming logic to force people to behave in a certain way, and that's great. And so the argument there is, well, then in that case, why? Well, it's kind of a different argument. Whereas he was talking about we can code dApps in a way, smart contracts, programming logic that forces people to behave in certain ways. In this particular argument, we're saying we're not going to put in a technological feature to force people not to have that option of doing evil. That's the nuance, but that's fine. Let's play with that. Let's go with that. It just goes back to my earlier point. Where you have that freedom of choice, I don't see this as the option to do evil. You've given people the freedom of choice to avoid evil. So anybody using that phrase, can't do evil, won't do evil, perhaps there's a little caveat in there saying allow people to bypass evil. That's what we're talking about here. Okay, I probably rambled enough about that point. Decentralization and the MAV. So this is the argument that, okay, this is what I think the argument here is, which is if you have contingent staking, it would allow big corporates like Binance, etc., to do staking. Because they can now have whatever disclaimers they need, they can do whatever KYC they need, and then it will concentrate staking into those hands. The reason why I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact is, again, I just don't think many people want to go through the headache of signing forms or doing KYC or even agreeing to a TNC unless they really have to. You might argue that, but Binance is going to offer better returns, that's why people will do it. Well, that's a completely different discussion then. That's an issue to do with returns and the minimum fee and all of that, which is a whole other topic. Sure, if that's your concern, fight it on that front. Fight it on the front of the parameters of Cardano. Trying to conflate it with this issue just doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, I don't think having the feature of doing contingent staking is going to have that much of an impact on decentralization and the MAV. I think what you're really saying there, for those that believe in this, is look, we just want to make life hard for Binance. That's what we're saying. So if this feature is going to be useful to Binance, we don't want it, which is just a ridiculous argument in my opinion, because there are many other uses for a feature such as this, and we don't want to be like chopping off our arm despite our nose, or whatever the phrase is on this. The L2 sidechain solution. So this would have been my preferred solution. How Charles has always said, look, you can always build different different sidechains essentially to cater to different needs. So if you want a healthcare sidechain, you can have that, and then that would have all the healthcare related rules and regulation features in place. So you'd think, okay, well, let's just do a sidechain around this, or possibly an L2. It doesn't work when it comes to staking. It might work when you're talking about transactions. On the staking side, you effectively, if you do a sidechain, you're going to have to replicate, let's say, MinSwap. Are you going to have a sidechain version of MinSwap? And are you going to have a sidechain for every jurisdiction out there? And what if you wanted like a healthcare app built on a sidechain that also does US regulation and separately a UK regulation? So two different healthcare apps. Are you going to have an L3 on top of that? So the whole idea around sidechains, to me, I know DC Spark have tweeted about it, and initially I was excited, but I read through what they tweeted, and I didn't quite see how they're aiming to fix this. It just sounds like there'll be a lot more friction there having a sidechain based solution. If however, somebody convinces me that no, actually, a sidechain based solution that can cater to different regulations and it's going to be seamless. You're not going to have 5 different versions of every app. If somebody can explain it to me in a way that it does seem that it'll be fairly painless for the end user, then sure, I definitely would then prefer that type of solution. But as it stands, as I thought through it, I just didn't think sidechains and L2 would be the right solution here. So I moved away from that idea. And then that gets you to look the SPO business model. So on the one hand, I see SPOs as being these neutral entities, and all they do is they just process transactions, and they have very, very little ability beyond that. That is one view of what an SPO should be. But then the way Charles describes it, and it's, in my opinion, an equally valid point, is actually no. SPOs could be a whole, you can have a whole SPO ecosystem out there of lots of different types of SPOs. And initially I thought, well, why? Why do we need that? I get you have lots of different dApps out there doing lots of different cool, funky things, but why do we need our SPOs to be cool and funky? Why can't they be fairly simple and just process transactions? And this is where, again, welcome to views. I'm not fully sort of bought in yet, and this is why I hope on the conversation later, Charles or whoever gives a better clear-cut examples of this type of business, use case for contingent staking. But I can't imagine a world where actually there isn't a single boring, dull model for an SPO. That's one view, sure, but actually let's just imagine for a second where the SPO does become a business model of different sorts. Different people can be very inventive and creative around it. Why should we limit the creativity of people's ideas around what you do with blockchain and what you do with Cardano to the dApp side of the house, to the transaction side? The SPO concept is actually fairly unique. It is an innovation. And I just don't like the idea of stifling that innovation at the outset by saying, no, it should just be grey, dull, and boring. That's the way it should always be. I kind of like the idea of people innovating around it. I like that, we had the whole reverse ISPO and all these other mechanisms over the last year when different dApp projects were launching their projects and allowing, giving away their tokens. There's also clever ideas, and go Husky token, also delegating a token as part of the Husky pools. I love all that innovation. That's great innovation. I want us to continue innovating around the SPO business model, and I don't want to just upfront say no, SPOs have to be grey, dull, and boring. And sure, it might mean that Binance come up with an SPO and they have their terms of agreement. It might mean, Nike come up with some funky Nike SPO, and for whatever reason, some clever idea around Nike. So there might be a lot more corporate entities then taking part in running a stake pool because they can do some funky cool shit with it. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I'm not I'm not afraid of commercial entities having a go at being SPOs. That is not where the debate around decentralization and MAV should be. That's the Bitcoiner paranoia. It's saying, no, we do not want, we want to make the SPO technology so unattractive to anybody except for your man in a van type stake pool operation. We want to just make it look very unattractive so that others don't get any bright ideas. That just doesn't sit comfortably with me. That is not how I think we should be tackling the decentralization and MAV question. So that's really it. I've just rambled a lot there, and I did come across as more preachy and rambly than I probably intended. But I just wanted to get all those thoughts off my chest, and just tweeting little paragraphs here and there just wasn't doing it. Definitely looking forward to the debate later. Definitely open to being swayed, but these are my thoughts at the moment.